Minister, before I come to the subject of today's debate, I'd just like to welcome the important announcement made yesterday in relation to the additional support for the arts community. As you know, I spoke about this issue not long ago, drawing attention to the enormous contribution the arts sector makes to our society, despite the precarious nature of the work for many artists and staff involved. The COVID-19 crisis has magnified this vulnerability, not only today but possibly for months or years to come. So it's a very welcome move to see further funding going to the sector. The arts community is inherently versatile, so it lends itself well to the efficient use of resources and in planning for a very different future which this sector faces, so thank you for that. To the subject of today's debate, it's over a year since our country declared a climate and biodiversity emergency, the second country in the world to do so. But I often question what that declaration actually means to us and for us, whether it was tokenistic or if it was a genuine signal of our intent to act on a crisis which threatens the very fabric of our society and economy. As you know, Minister, before taking my seat in the Dáil, I was a primary school teacher, and that's a job that very often involves trying to explain complex things in a simple way. Biodiversity is an extremely complex thing, but it can be explained and understood in a very simple way. It has to do with the balance and interdependence between ourselves and the natural environment. The balance of our society and economies depends on a healthy ecosystem and broad biodiversity. We may not fully know the extent to which humans depend on biodiversity, but what we do know shows us we cannot maintain a stable climate or provide sufficient food for ourselves if we do not stop biodiversity loss. We need the plants that provide the basis for medicine and medical treatments. We need the large and diverse forest cover that soaks up thousands of tonnes of CO2 emissions produced by humans. We need the coral reefs that protect our coasts from increasing erosion and sea level rise. We can't just look at biodiversity as something that needs to be protected. It is a vital resource and service that we depend on. Unfortunately, it's now undisputed that this very service, provided to us by a natural environment for free, is being exploited and attacked by us, the service users. We need not be reminded of the countless statistics and trends about biodiversity loss, all of which point in the wrong direction. My own party has long pointed out the worrying developments in Ireland, such as the drastic decline in bird species, the dire pollution of our waterways, and threats to over half of Ireland's bee species. So while I don't want to paint an exclusively negative picture this afternoon, I just want to set the context of where we're starting from in regards to the efforts of the National Climate Action Plan, and in particular the work under your department to protect biodiversity and enhance mitigation and adaptation to climate change in our built heritage. Despite the drastic threats that biodiversity faces today, it is gifted just a few short sentences in the Climate Action Plan and the National Transition Plan. However, when we learn of yet another species under threat, headlines are made, concerns are raised and more statements arrive about the need to take action. By the same token, if we were to lose key cultural and historical landmarks to climate impacts, I don't doubt such occurrences would make the national news across our country. It reminds me of the Joni Mitchell song, "Don't it always seem to go, you don't know what you've got till it's gone." But when it's gone, Minister, it's gone, it's too late. We simply can't afford to be too late when it comes to tackling this issue around biodiversity. So I'd like to acknowledge the work that your department has undertaken, both as part of the Climate Action Plan, but also more broadly in relation to maintaining Ireland's culture and heritage and the protection of biodiversity. As the subject of this debate is on the National Transition Statement, most of my points and questions will address this. Leis sin ag a deireadh ba bhailim cúpla focail a rá faoin Ghaeilge freisin, agus go háirithe faoi ar geantracha Gaeltachta mar tá siad faoi láthair agus mar a bheidh siad sa tóchaí. So first off, I'd like to commend the efforts made by your department to develop the sectoral adaptation plans for built heritage and biodiversity. As a former councillor in the heritage city of Waterford, I'm more than familiar with the importance of protecting our historical buildings and sites. Not only is it vital for restoring our culture and history, it is a lifeline for tourism in Ireland. Waterford's Viking Triangle is an outstanding example of the same. But our historic sites are also difficult in terms of energy. Heating them is both highly expensive and frustrating, with warmth escaping through every crack and corner. And that's not to mention that we still rely, in the most part, on fossil fuels to heat these buildings. So, Minister, given that your department is responsible for the retrofitting of heritage buildings, can you provide more information or an update on the retrofit plans for sites and buildings? How costly an undertaking is it? And do you know how much the retrofits of heritage sites will contribute to the overall emissions reductions of our built environment? On climate adaptation, Minister, I didn't have to read your whole sectoral plan to understand the vulnerability of built and archaeological heritage It's quite sobering and definitely resonates with those of us who appreciate Irish history and culture. It seems like a lifetime ago that Ireland experienced 5 consecutive storms in the month of February alone. But this is most likely going to be our status quo of our weather systems. So my question, Minister, is whether there are enough resources available for your department, for local authorities and for institutions to sufficiently prepare for a future of more frequent and severe storms. And what is the safety net for public institutions to be able to pay for damages done to property? For example, the library in UCC that experienced severe damage as a result of flooding, as referenced in your adaptation plan. On the same topic of losses, damages and costs, I want to raise the insurance sector. While insurance is by no means the answer in climate adaptation of buildings, it should play some role, particularly as we now have a much greater understanding of the potential impact and damages. Minister, are there any provisions for working with the insurance sector so that local authorities and indeed your own department is not facing exponential costs brought on by climate-induced damages? On biodiversity, I've already spoken about the stark reality that we face as a country and globally. So I'll speak specifically to the plan undertaken by your department, Minister. It's most definitely welcome to see a sectoral adaptation plan for biodiversity, though I would propose that our country needs to go further and make biodiversity a more central pillar of our policy making. Minister, I know that the ink on the biodiversity plan is not long dry, but can you provide an update on some of the actions that you specify in the plan, for example, peatland restoration and the reboot of the invasive species Ireland? Additionally, are the incentives for farmers to protect biodiversity enough? Have they gone far enough to meet the challenge? And finally, on biodiversity, having read the EU's biodiversity and farm-to-fork strategies, do we need to go back to the drawing board to be in line with forthcoming legislation on land and biodiversity restoration? And then lastly, Minister, as I mentioned, I'd like to briefly touch on the Gaeltacht region. The Gaeltacht is a part of Ireland that for decades has just been surviving. Gaeltacht regions are often marked by migration of young people to cities, while their economic lifeline depends heavily on tourism and summer schools, 2 sectors that will be severely hit this year. But like so many parts of our country and economy, the Gaeltacht is resilient and adaptive to change. Over the last 3 months, we've heard time and again about the merits of remote working and digital hubs that save many of our workforce long and stressful commutes, high rents and cramped office space. In an effort to achieve a better regional balance across our island, Gaeltacht regions start me as a perfect place for further developing business, cultural and community hubs. Continued improvements in broadband and connectivity are bringing our islands and remote regions closer to us and providing viable options for people to work where they are most productive and comfortable. So, Minister, can we build upon the impressive initiatives that are catching on across the Gaeltacht? For example, Údarás na Gaeltachta's GTech initiative, which has supported digital and working hubs in locations throughout Ireland's Gaeltacht regions.
Thank you, Deputy O'Connor.